Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned because it's Wednesday. That means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we'll talk about a certain comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue over on his channel will talk about the same comic book, graphic novel, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week. And this week is kind of special because we're talking about a graphic novel, and it's one of the earliest graphic novels. It was published in 1971, and it was created by Gil Kane, the legendary comic book artist Gil Kane, who rose to comic book fame as the artist on Green Lantern. For the entire Silver Age over at DC Comics, he drew Green Lantern, and he just did an amazing job on that comic book. He deserves all the praise that he's gotten for that work on Green Lantern. But then after that, he moved on to everything else. He kind of cut loose. His style really became dynamic. And he drew, I think, every character in existence at Marvel and DC. He drew everything. Spider-Man, Conan, Superman. He drew everybody. And he's just revered as a great comic book artist, Gil Kane. But he had a vision for the future for comic books. He loved the medium of comic books. But he didn't think the future of comic books was in the little floppy magazine format comic books, the monthly comics that we're so used to. He didn't think that that was the future of comics. He thought those would eventually die out. And he thought the future of comics was in bookstores. He thought the future of comics was basically graphic novels. And he wanted to be a part of that before graphic novels were even a thing. And so he created Blackmark. He created this. Blackmark, a story, a sword and sorcery post-apocalyptic story. A story that takes place in the destroyed future, as it says on the cover here. Blackmark, a new full-length action adventure in words and pictures. First in a series of daring adventures featuring Blackmark in the primitive world of the future, the post-apocalyptic future. So this was supposed to be the first in a series. I think I read it was supposed to be about 8 books long, Blackmark. Unfortunately, this didn't sell. And so only the first one was printed as a mass market paperback, which is how this came out, which is not how you would do it now. But back in those days, most books were either hardcovers or paperbacks, mass market paperbacks of this format. And that's how bookstores were set up to sell books. And I guess that because of that, it made sense to make this a mass market paperback as opposed to a bigger trade paperback, which would be more appropriate for reproducing the artwork in this book. But it was a mass market. And like I said, that makes sense because they could just stick it along with all the other science fiction mass market paperbacks. And it's an interesting book. Gil Kane did all of this himself. Gil Kane was not known as a comic book writer. He was a great artist, but he did, as far as I am aware, everything in Blackmark. And there was actually a whole second story of Blackmark, which was already finished when this was printed. And that did eventually see publication in a magazine. I think it was a Marvel magazine, Marvel Premiere or something like that. But I don't have a copy of that, unfortunately. And years later, this was published along with that second story in a larger graphic novel. And I think I want to say Dark Horse printed that. I don't know. I don't have that. I only have this first edition. That's all I have of Blackmark. So we're going to take a look at Blackmark as it was originally printed. It is a story of the wasteland of the future Now, as described early in this book, first of all, look at that. That's cool. So this is all printed in black and white in this little mass market paperback. And it has just some great artwork. Gil Kane was a master, and you could really see that in this book. Now, as the preface states, old Earth is dead, devastated by the nuclear holocausts. New Earth lives on as a shadow world, inhabited by the vestiges of humanity, divided into tyrannical petty kingdoms, racked by fear, superstitions, and barbaric poverty. Strange, fearsome, mutated beasts roam the blasted lands and swim the poisoned seas. So, it's kind of a mess, future Earth. Now, this first volume is mostly setup. This is supposed to set up the story of Blackmark, that guy there on the cover with the sword. And so, Blackmark's parents, before Blackmark is born, Blackmark's parents are in a wagon because they're homesteaders. They're homesteading the nuclear wasteland. And they're traveling through the wasteland. And this is basically how the whole book is set up. Has 2, maybe 3 panels to a page. Sometimes you have a full page. Heavy on the text with some word balloons when people talk. But that's the basic setup of the story, and that's the format of how this is done. So they're traveling to a new home across the blasted land, Blackmark's parents, when Blackmark's future dad, like I said, Blackmark isn't born yet, goes off hunting for who knows what out in the wasteland, when this guy stumbles into their camp. So this guy is King Amarix, I think his name was. Now this is a king who was driven out of his territory, out of his kingdom, because he wanted to bring science back, and science is taboo in the future. Everybody knows that science led to nuclear devastation, so no more science. But this king knows that, science can be used for good, and he wants to bring science back so, everybody could have radios and television and things like that. And he's traveling with his good pal here, the scientist. He's traveling with a scientist who in the far future is considered a wizard. Now, the king is severely injured. He was injured when he was driven out of his kingdom. And he has all of this great scientific knowledge that he doesn't want to be lost. So he sees this woman out here in the wasteland, and he says, "You know what? I am dying, but I don't want all of my great knowledge to be lost to humanity. So what I'm going to do is this. My scientist pal here has this fantastic thingamajig machine, and we'll each strap one of these machines to our heads, and all of my great knowledge will be transferred into your head. Only it's not for you. You have to wait till you have a kid, and then the kid will be born with my knowledge. And eventually, as he grows up, he'll remember all of this great scientific information that I have to transfer on. And then, he'll be a great benefit to humanity." That's kind of how it goes. And so, he convinces her of this. This seems kind of far-fetched to me, but lo and behold, he does have these machines, and the scientist friend helps them strap it to their heads, and exactly that happens. All of his knowledge goes into her brain to someday be transferred down to her child, her son, Blackmark. And, that's just what happens. So eventually the homesteaders find a home. Their Blackmark is born. All the knowledge goes into Blackmark's brain. And then we move on to chapter 2. Now, the chapter heads have really cool artwork on them. This thing is just great as far as the quality of the artwork. And so Blackmark already wants to, swing a sword around when he's a little boy. But then tragedy strikes. You remember, this is the future Earth where everything sucks. Well, here we have a terrible warlord and his band of savage warriors. They just show up, to torment people and burn down towns, things like that, as they will do. And one day they confront Blackmark's father at their little cabin there. And the Blackmark's dad tries to fight the guy, but is immediately killed by this evil warlord in the funny mask and hat. Blackmark sees the whole thing, and even worse, they find Blackmark's mom, and right in front of Blackmark, they violently assault her. And then this guy kills her, just stabs her. So there's a lot of violence in this thing, but you don't see any details in the artwork. You know what happens because he tells you what happens in the text, but the artwork is pretty restrained as far as violence is concerned. For the most part. Like, you don't actually see her being stabbed, but you see him raise the sword above her, and it says, oh yeah, he kills her. So Blackmark just watches his parents die. And out here in the rain, Blackmark vows, I will make you pay. I will make the whole earth pay by making the earth mine. Ruled by me. Blackmark. So he vows to take over the earth. I will rule the earth. Now, I will pause here. Before young Blackmark is taken into slavery and becomes a gladiator, I will pause here just to mention one of the things about this book. So this book is all plot, basically. It's very plot heavy. This is not long. It's fairly short. So he doesn't have a lot of time to get this story across. And so the characters are pretty basic. And Blackmark himself, at this point in his Blackmark story, is sort of a mystery. So as far as what kind of person he is, we know he's angry, as, anybody would be after experiencing what Blackmark has experienced. And he wants to take over the world. And wouldn't you know it, he actually has the knowledge to do this because of the king, who put all this knowledge into his brain. But he's filled with the desire for vengeance. And I was struck while reading this. In a couple weeks, on Epic Comic Book Wednesday, Steve and I will be talking about the origin story for Doctor Doom. And there are some similarities between Doctor Doom's origin story and Blackmark's. And Blackmark, he wants to take over the earth, and he wants vengeance. And you have no idea at this point in the story if that's actually a good thing. You assume Blackmark is the hero because this is the type of story where Blackmark would be a hero. But he could just be a terrible tyrant. He could be a supervillain, and this could be his supervillain origin story. It kind of feels that way. The way he's shouting about how he's going to take over the world. We never get that far in Blackmark's story, though, so we don't know. We're just assuming Blackmark's going to be a hero, but he does sound kind of villainous. And throughout the whole story, he just wants vengeance on this warlord who killed his parents, which is, like I said, understandable. I see why. It's just, do I really want this guy to conquer the earth? I don't know, man. It might be worse. Anyway, Blackmark is enslaved. He eventually becomes a gladiator. In a future in the kingdom where the king that we were talking about, he was driven off. Well, now he's a slave in that kingdom, and the awful new king and the king's awful new wife are there. And this thing right here is a rocket ship which hangs out behind this idol in the middle of the arena. It's just in the middle of the arena. Now, there's a legend that There's a legend that anybody who can make the rocket ship move will become the new king. But if you try to make the rocket ship move and it doesn't move, you get killed. So not many people actually try to move the rocket ship. But that is the legend. And Blackmark is out here being rebellious, fighting all kinds of folks in the gladiatorial arena. Now, in the slave pens in the arena, Blackmark actually comes across this guy who was the wizard that we met earlier, the scientist. Scientists are considered wizards in the future. So he was the scientist pal of the king who put all the knowledge into Blackmark's mom. And so now he knows, hey, I've met this guy, because Blackmark actually has a mark on his leg that was the same mark that his mom had, for convenience's sake, so that this guy could recognize Blackmark later on. And he says, hey, I know you. I've been waiting for you my whole life. You're the future destiny of humanity. And Blackmark's like, yeah, whatever, dude. I just want to kill the guy who murdered my mother. And all throughout this thing, we have really cool artwork, like at the arena there. Now, Blackmark has to fight a dragon in the arena. It's a mutated future dragon, but it's a dragon, and that's pretty cool. And Blackmark fights and defeats the dragon by stabbing the dragon in the eye. That's how you defeat dragons. Just so you know, if you're ever in an arena in the post-apocalyptic future and you need to kill a dragon, that's how you do it. Look at that. Another great chapter ahead there. Now, in this final part of the story, Blackmark, as you knew he would, goes up to the rocket ship, and because of his future knowledge, which is starting to kick in, the great knowledge that the king has given him, he's able to open the doors of the rocket ship. And he remembers how to work the rocket ship, and he turns the rocket ship on, and the rocket ship flies up into the air, and everybody and all the people in the arena are like, yes, the rocket ship has moved. He's the new king. Let's kill the old king. Let's all kill the old king. So there's a huge rebellion that just breaks out, and everybody wants to kill the king, the existing king. And on the rocket ship, Blackmark discovers this handy sword, which is a sword that can zap people. It's a zappy sword. You just press a button on its hilt and it will zap you, because it's a zappy sword of the future. And the rocket ship comes back down, lands right back down in the arena. It doesn't actually go anywhere. It just goes up and comes back down. I don't know why. It's so Blackmark could fight at the head of all of these people and, take over. And he does. He takes over, and he does see the guy who killed his mom, but that guy gets away. But Blackmark is here. He is the new king, and here he gives his tyrannical speech there. He looks see what I mean? He just looks kind of frightening there. Like, do I want to follow this guy? I don't know. But that's basically what this story is. It's the rise of Blackmark. Blackmark goes from being a little baby to growing up, becoming a slave and a gladiator, and eventually, at the end of this book, a king. And the story goes on from there afterwards. Like I said, I don't have the second part of this story. I kind of wish I did, because I would like to see where this story goes. And unfortunately, the story was never finished because this did not sell. Perhaps it was just too unusual. Perhaps it was the story itself. There is not... the artwork is wonderful. I love the artwork in this. I don't think the format of the artwork, the mass market format of the book, does the artwork any favors at all. This was not the best way to print this story, but that's the way it was done. And the artwork is great. But the story itself is just nothing special. I enjoyed it. It's entertaining, but there's not a single original idea in the whole thing, I don't think. And so maybe when people read it, they were just like, that was okay. And of course, people in the early 70s probably thought this was interesting, a comic book published like this. Graphic novel, the term graphic novel wasn't around, I don't believe, in the early 70s. Graphic novels weren't a thing, so this was just a curiosity. Now, of course, it is important for what it is in the genre of comic books. And it's a shame that Gil Kane wasn't able to continue this series because he believed in it and he wanted to produce the whole thing, I'm sure. And it's just a shame he didn't. But it's interesting, and if you're interested in Gil Kane as an artist, and you certainly should be because he was great, this is a really cool thing to read. I'm sure you could find on eBay copies of the newer edition that has both the stories in it. And you could still find this, actually, fairly easily. And I recommend it. Blackmark, a little bit of comic book history. Okay, guys, I will catch you next time.